tears started before the music even began. But these weren't tears of sadness. Margaret Thompson, 78 years old, stood on the America's Got Talent stage holding her granddaughter's hand, and for one shining moment she remembered everything perfectly. Her name, where she was, why she was there, but Simon Cowell was about to witness something that would haunt him forever, a woman's final perfect moment before memory fades into darkness. What happened next would prove that love transcends even the cruelest diseases. It was supposed to be a simple audition. Margaret Thompson and her granddaughter Sophie had driven from a small town in Ohio, their battered Honda loaded with hope and desperation. Margaret, a retired music teacher who had spent 40 years nurturing young voices, was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Some days she was sharp as ever. Other days she forgot her own daughter's name. But music she never forgot. Sophie, 24, had been Margaret's caregiver for 2 years since the diagnosis. She'd watched her brilliant grandmother, valedictorian, master's degree in music education, church organist for 5 decades, slowly slip away piece by piece. Names disappeared first, then faces, then entire conversations would vanish minutes after they happened. The only constant was music. When Margaret sat at her old upright piano, something magical occurred. Her arthritic fingers would find the keys with the precision of someone 60 years younger. Songs from her childhood, hymns from church, classical pieces she'd taught to thousands of students. They all remained locked safely in the part of her brain that Alzheimer's hadn't yet claimed. Music is the last thing to go, Margaret's doctor had explained to Sophie. Sometimes people who can't remember their own children can still play Chopin perfectly. That's when Sophie got the idea. If her grandmother was going to lose herself eventually, why not let the world see who she really was while she still could? The AGT audition tape they submitted was simple. Margaret, on a good day, playing Amazing Grace while Sophie sang harmony. The producers were moved by the story, but hesitant. Elderly contestants were one thing. Contestants with progressive neurological diseases were another entirely. What if she has an episode on stage? The head producer had asked during their phone screening. Then you'll see something real, Sophie had replied. You'll see what love looks like when everything else is taken away. They'd been accepted for a live audition, but with conditions. Medical staff on standby, a shortened performance window, and Sophie would stay on stage with Margaret at all times. Now, standing under the blazing lights of the Dolby Theater, Margaret looked around with the confusion that had become increasingly common. She squinted at the judges' table, trying to process where she was. "Hello," Terry Crews announced with his characteristic warmth. "Please, welcome Margaret and Sophie Thompson." The audience applauded politely. To them, this looked like a standard grandmother-granddaughter duo. Sweet, probably not very competitive, but worth a few minutes of their time. Margaret waved tentatively at the crowd, then leaned over to Sophie. "Honey, where are we exactly?" The microphones picked it up. 3,000 audience members heard a woman ask where she was while standing on the most famous talent show stage in America. The moment should have been heartbreaking. Instead, Sophie's response made it beautiful. "We're at America's Got Talent, Grandma. Remember? You're going to play piano for all these nice people." Margaret's face lit up with recognition and delight, like someone remembering a wonderful surprise. "Oh, yes, the piano! I love playing piano." From the judges' table, Simon watched with growing fascination. In 20 years of judging, he'd never seen anything quite like this. The unfiltered honesty of someone whose social inhibitions had been stripped away by disease. "Margaret," Sophia called out gently, "can you tell us a little about yourself?" Margaret looked toward the voice, but seemed to have trouble locating its source. Sophie whispered something in her ear and pointed toward the judges. "Oh, yes," Margaret said, suddenly animated. "I'm a music teacher. I've been teaching piano for... She paused, the number lost somewhere in the fog of her mind. "For a very long time, and this is my granddaughter Sophie. She has a beautiful voice, just beautiful." She leaned into the microphone conspiratorially. "I taught her everything she knows, but don't tell her I said that." The audience chuckled warmly. There was something endearing about Margaret's childlike directness. "What song will you be performing for us today?" Howie asked. Margaret looked confused again. She turned to Sophie with panic beginning to creep into her eyes. "What song, honey? I can't remember what song." This was the moment Sophie had been dreading. On the drive to Los Angeles, Margaret had been clear about their plan. They would sing "You Are My Sunshine" together, a song Margaret had sung to Sophie as a child. But now, standing on stage, that memory had evaporated. "It's okay, Grandma," Sophie said softly, squeezing her hand. "Whatever song feels right in your heart." Margaret nodded, seeming to understand, even though she'd forgotten the original plan. Sophie guided her to the piano that had been set up center stage, a beautiful black grand that gleamed under the lights. Margaret sat down on the bench and placed her hands over the keys. For a moment, she just sat there, staring down at the black and white keys like she'd never seen them before. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Audience members shifted in their seats. The judges exchanged worried glances. This was looking like it might be one of those painful auditions that everyone would remember for the wrong reasons. Then something extraordinary happened. Margaret's fingers found the keys, and she began to play, not tentatively, not with the uncertainty she'd shown while speaking, with absolute confidence and stunning beauty. The melody that flowed from the piano was "Danny Boy," the Irish ballad that had been her late husband's favorite song. But here's where the magic truly began. As Margaret played, her entire demeanor transformed. The confusion vanished from her face. Her back straightened. Her eyes, which had been cloudy and uncertain moments before, became clear and focused. It was as if the music had awakened the woman who had been buried beneath the disease. Sophie, recognizing the song, began to sing, "Oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside." Her voice was beautiful, trained, and pure, but it was Margaret's accompaniment that made the performance transcendent. Every note was perfect. Every chord change was flawless. Her fingers danced across the keys with the grace of someone who had lived their entire life in service to music. From the judges' table, Simon found himself leaning forward. He'd heard this song performed hundreds of times, but never like this. There was something in Margaret's playing, a depth of emotion, a lifetime of musical wisdom that elevated the familiar melody into something sacred. But then, midway through the second verse, Margaret began to sing along. Her voice was thin and quavering, not trained like Sophie's. But when she sang the words, "I'll be here in sunshine or in shadow," she looked directly at her granddaughter with such profound love that everyone in the theater felt it. "I love you, Sophie," Margaret said, still playing but speaking directly into the microphone. "I may not always remember your name, but I will never forget how much I love you." Sophie's voice caught in her throat. She kept singing, but tears began streaming down her face. "And I will hear, though soft, you tread above me, and all my grave will warmer, sweeter be." The audience was completely silent, not the polite quiet of people waiting for a song to finish, but the reverent silence of people witnessing something holy. Margaret continued playing, but she had stopped singing. Instead, she began to speak, her words flowing over the melody like a stream over stones. "Music never forgets," she said, her voice clear and strong. "They tell me I have a disease that takes memories away, but music lives in a different part of your heart, the part that sickness can't touch." Simon Cowell, who had seen everything in 20 years of judging, felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was a woman saying goodbye to herself while she still could. "I taught children for 40 years, Margaret continued, her fingers never missing a note. "I watched them grow up and have children of their own. I won't remember all their names, but I'll remember the music we made, together." She looked directly at the judges now, her eyes completely clear and present. "Mr. Simon," she said, somehow knowing exactly who he was, despite her confusion earlier, "I want you to know something important. Love is like music. Even when you can't remember the words, your heart still knows the melody." The piano reached the final chorus, and Sophie, through her tears, sang with a voice that seemed to carry every emotion in the world. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so." As the final notes faded, Margaret lifted her hands from the keys and looked around the theater with wonder, as if seeing it for the first time again. "That was beautiful," she whispered to Sophie. "Did we do well?" The silence that followed was profound. Then slowly, one person in the audience began to applaud, then another. Within seconds, 3,000 people were on their feet, not just clapping, but sobbing, cheering, celebrating something they couldn't quite name, but knew they'd never forget. Simon stood up and walked around the judges' table. He climbed onto the stage and approached Margaret, who looked at him with polite confusion. "Margaret," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." She smiled up at him pleasantly. "Yes, dear? In 20 years of judging talent shows, I have never heard anything more beautiful than what you just gave us." Margaret looked puzzled. "What did I give you?" "Hope," Simon replied simply. "You gave us hope that love is stronger than loss, that music is stronger than memory, that the most important parts of who we are can never be taken away." He turned to address the entire theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed something extraordinary. Margaret Thompson has shown us that talent isn't about perfection. It isn't about youth or technical skill. Talent is about the ability to touch hearts and change lives." Margaret was listening intently, trying to follow along. "Are you talking about me?" she asked innocently. "I'm talking about you, Margaret. I'm talking about how you just reminded everyone in this theater that the most beautiful music comes from the heart, not from the head." Simon looked at Sophie, then back at Margaret. "Margaret, I need to ask you something. Tomorrow you might not remember this conversation. You might not remember this stage or this moment. But will you remember how it felt to play that song?" Margaret's eyes lit up with understanding. "Oh, yes. Music I always remember. Music lives in here." She pointed to her heart. "Not in here." She tapped her temple. "So even when my mind forgets, my heart still knows every song." The judges were openly crying now. Howie had his head in his hands. Heidi was reaching for tissues. Sophia was trying to compose herself enough to speak. "Margaret," Sophia finally managed, "you and Sophie didn't just perform for us tonight. You taught us something profound about the power of love and music." And, Howie added, his voice thick with emotion, "you reminded us that the most important memories aren't stored in our minds, they're stored in our souls." Heidi stood up. "Margaret, I have a grandmother with Alzheimer's. She doesn't remember my name anymore, but after watching you tonight, I know she still remembers how much she loves me." Margaret nodded sagely. "Love never gets lost, dear. It just finds new ways to show itself." The judges, in a moment of unprecedented unity, reached for their buzzers simultaneously. 4 golden X's lit up the stage, but tonight they meant something different. Tonight they meant, "You have given us something more valuable than entertainment. You have given us wisdom." But Simon wasn't done. "Margaret, Sophie, I want to make you a promise. This performance will be remembered long after all the singing and dancing acts are forgotten, because you've shown us that real talent isn't about what you can remember. It's about what you can never forget." He looked directly into the main camera. "To everyone watching tonight, Margaret Thompson is losing her memories to Alzheimer's disease. But she has just proven that some things are stronger than any disease. Love is stronger than loss, music is stronger than memory, and the human spirit is stronger than anything that tries to diminish it." Margaret, following his gaze to the camera, waved cheerfully at the millions of viewers. "Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our little song." As confetti fell and the audience continued their standing ovation, Margaret turned to Sophie with a confused but happy expression. "Honey, why is everyone so excited? Did something special happen?" Sophie hugged her grandmother tightly. "Something very special happened, Grandma. You reminded everyone what love looks like." "Oh, good," Margaret replied with childlike delight. "I do love making people happy." The story doesn't end there. Margaret's performance became the most watched AGT audition in the show's history, not because it was technically perfect, but because it was emotionally perfect. It raised over $5 million for Alzheimer's research and inspired thousands of families dealing with similar diagnoses. 6 months later, Margaret no longer recognized her own reflection. She couldn't remember Sophie's name or her own, but when Sophie played Danny Boy on the old upright piano at the memory care facility, Margaret would smile and sometimes hum along. Music never forgets, she would say on her clearer days, though she couldn't explain why the phrase felt important. Simon Cowell visited Margaret twice before her condition progressed too far. During their last meeting, she didn't know who he was, but when he mentioned music, her face lit up. Music is love, she told him earnestly. Even when everything else goes away, music and love stay right here. She tapped her heart. That's what I tell all my students. Simon left that day with a new understanding of what talent really meant. It wasn't about hitting perfect notes or delivering flawless performances. It was about the courage to share your heart with the world, especially when everything else is falling apart. Margaret Thompson taught everyone who witnessed her performance that the most beautiful songs aren't the ones we remember perfectly. They're the ones we feel completely. Because love, like music, lives in a place that disease cannot touch. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to hear what that sounds like. Share this story. Because the world needs to remember that when everything else fades away, love and music remain. And sometimes that's all we need to create something beautiful. Margaret's piano still sits in the memory care facility's common room. When Sophie visits, she plays Danny Boy and tells her grandmother about the day they sang together on television. Margaret doesn't remember the stage or the judges or the applause, but she smiles when she hears the music. And for just a moment, the woman who taught thousands of children to love music shines through again. Because some things are stronger than forgetting, some things live beyond memory, some things are eternal, and on one magical night in Los Angeles, a 78-year-old woman with Alzheimer's proved that music, love, and the human spirit are three of those eternal things.